Hello and welcome to your Urban Connections. Remember, this is the channel that is often imitated but is never duplicated. And today I'm honored to have as a special guest Wichita City Councilman Brandon Johnson. Welcome to the program, Mr. Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Barfield, for having me. Sorry it took so long to get on the program.
Yeah, okay. I want to talk to you, sir. You've been on the commission now for, I say commission, but council, for you're in your seventh year, is that correct?
Yep, just started my seventh year.
Okay, your seventh year. So basically, in your 7 years, you've had an opportunity to work with a majority Republican, even though it's supposed to be nonpartisan, but a majority Republican, majority Democrat, and now back to majority Republican. So, what basically would you say has been your biggest accomplishment during your, we'll just say 6 years on the council?
Well, one correction. Right now, we are technically a split council per registration: three Republicans, three Democrat, one Libertarian.
Okay.
Um, I think biggest accomplishment. I've been asked that a few times. I don't have one thing. It really kind of depends on what you look at. We could say supporting and helping with the water treatment plant. It's the biggest infrastructure project in City of Wichita's history at $500 million that helps secure our water needs in the future. I could look at saying the Carl G. Brewer Center, $13.2 million, expanding that, making it three times the size it is. That'd be the Cadillac community centers in the city of Wichita. I was very excited about saving the pool at McAdams and renaming it for Mr. McAfee, who designed it. We put $2 million into that. We've increased funding for roads. I don't have a favorite. I'm just really happy about the progress we've made, but really focus more on what I haven't been able to do and trying to get more done.
All right, that's going to be my second question. What are your biggest disappointments in the 6 years?
We haven't been able to do as much economic development wise as I've wanted to. That was kind of a focus of mine going in. I caught a lot of flack early on from people who didn't understand the need for business help, economic development in our community. But I've always felt that if we were to increase the ability of especially our Black residents to make money, things would be different in community. They'd be able to, remodel their own houses and renovate them and help those facades. We'd be able to see some of those vacant buildings in our community be used by our businesses, and people will be able to walk to those instead of driving by and seeing boarded up businesses or buildings, seeing businesses close. That's one of the things that I've been able to make a little progress on. But what we truly need is more investment privately into these opportunities. And then some of our business folks, historically, there's an issue with connections to capital in the Black community. We don't have those at the same rates as our white counterparts. And we've done some things to try to help that, but a lot more is needed. And I think if we can see more of that, we'll see a lot more change in our community pretty quickly.
Okay, now, you mentioned two things there that I want to expand on a little bit. But first, I'm going to go back to this, what you say about the economic development. You know, I, you know, we talk about this study we just talked about, and basically when I look at the council as a whole, and I want to say this, and I don't want you to take this personally, and I
Hmm.
don't mean disrespect, but we've had five since district elections. We've had five district commissioners and council people. To the best of my knowledge, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know of a single one of those people that has went into that seat and had an economic agenda. Okay, now every one of them has talked about economic development, but we cannot really point to very much because one of the biggest things that I hear from people when I talk throughout the community is why don't we have this in our neighborhood? Why don't we have this in our neighborhood? Why don't we see some development? And let me give you a couple of examples. And we're going to talk about this. Number one, of course, is the grocery store. Okay. Number two is affordable housing. Okay. And those kinds of things, which any community really needs to survive, okay, and thrive. Now, so let's go back. speaking of grocery stores, I want to talk about that a little bit because I don't know if you're aware of this. This is, this is Black History Month. And last week, I posted on my Facebook page that in the 50s and 60s, we had 5 Black owned grocery stores in our neighborhood. And they were all independently owned by Black families. Okay. And today we don't have one. Now, I know that that was one of the big things on your agenda when you first took office. Now, we went from that to having to save a lot that closed. Okay. And there was a big uproar on that. And then we went from that to talking about providing some of these convenience stores, I guess you would call them, or dollar stores or whatever, with fresh meats and produce or whatever. And all of a sudden, that's completely, as I know, off the table. So what happened along the way?
Yeah, there was actually a lot that goes down a few different paths. So first, definitely food desert was an issue of mine before I was on council. What we have seen, you take Save a Lot, that's a chain restaurant. We saw nationally they had a
Chain
really
grocery
bad,
store.
yeah, and they had a bad business model. So they shut down over 300 around the country. We did have 2 people here, Black women, that we were looking at trying to help. City process wise, I can't just, dictate that they get the funds. They went through a number of hoops through different foundations and other organizations to fund their project. We had talked with the former Save a Lot store manager, a Black man who had offered to help out if they were able to get funds. But one of the funding suppliers had a radius in which they would not give funds for a grocery store. So one of the applicants was looking at an area that was within a radius that was too close per their definition to another store to get funds. Even with the support letter for me and a phone call, a little contentious phone call that we had, she still wasn't able to get funds. The city then came up with a plan called the Healthy Corner Store Initiative, which I believe is still open through May of this year for applications, in which we are looking at supporting freezers and refrigerators. It's not really the path I thought we should take. I believe we should be investing in growing food because if you buy all those refrigerators and freezers when the food is gone, it doesn't help anyone to have that. So I think we should be growing food, and I'll be continue to be vocal about that as I have been. But the challenge with grocery stores is finding folks who have the know-how and the willingness and the ability to access capital to actually get the store going. There's a lot of spaces they could be in, and I've been talking about those spaces for quite some time, some vacant buildings and others. Wichita really should shift to a bodega model when it comes to grocery stores and stop putting our hopes and dreams in bigger box stores like a Walmart or a Dillon's. Nothing wrong with them, but they look at different profit margins and they look at different populations and folks coming through. A bodega, I think, would be very successful. A space like Paul White owned, PMPC, the space that was a little smaller. You could
Mhm.
put some produce in there. I think people would go there. You can walk there. You can bike there. It's really about making sure it's in the spaces where people can get to it. And unfortunately, we haven't been able to do enough of that right now. That is something people will hear from me later this year as the Healthy Corner Store Initiative funding comes back up. And as we look at the fact that we still don't have enough access to fresh produce in our community.
Okay, now there's 2 things you just touched on that I want to expand on. Number one, the Save a Lot, when they first went out, and you mentioned uh, there was various rumors around the community going on about why they closed, but basically they said it was because it didn't fit their business model any longer. Now, I think, and this is me, but what I read into that was that they basically, I think we missed an opportunity, and I'm going to tell you why. There's 2 reasons. Number one, I think that store, when they first announced the closing and they announced their business model, uh, I think that had we been proactive and I think we had an opportunity to buy the store with the fixtures already there, okay, uh, and before it was all washed away, and bring that store back in operation, hire some employees or whatever. And the reason I say that is because that is exactly what has happened across the country. I did a podcast, well, I did an article on my podcast about 3 black guys. I think they were based out of Baltimore, but they now today own 38 former Save-A-Lot stores. Okay, and they got them at bargain prices. Most of those were located in the low-income neighborhoods. Okay, but they went in and they made some type of agreement. I don't know all the particulars about it, but they were able to get Save-A-Lot to sign over those stores. Okay, and with all the fixtures and everything, and I know several of them were in Chicago, but they're basically spread out all over in various areas. Like I said, they last I noticed they had 38 stores. And I think we missed an opportunity there. That's number one. Number two, the Save-A-Lot on K15 and Pawnee, right in that area. It's my understanding, and I've talked to the guy that bought that store. He bought the store with the purpose of maintaining a grocery store. It's my understanding from talking to him that he approached the city with the idea of not only having that remain as a grocery store, but also talking about the store at 13th and Gold. The city told him, thanks, but no thanks, we're not a bank. That to me was another missed opportunity. But I want to
Yeah.
ask you this question. Because basically everybody's been focusing on the city. The city. And I want to ask you a question. I don't know if you're aware of this or not. But when James R. Bertha was first formulating the plans for that Save-A-Lot store, he got $750,000 from the federal government through
Mhm.
Todd T. Hart.
Mhm.
Why is it that we're not taking that same approach? Why is it that we're not approaching the Kansas Chamber of Commerce? Why is it we're not approaching somebody from the federal level? You know, we've got a congressman and a senator out of Wichita in Washington, D.C. We pay taxes not only to the city of Wichita, we pay state taxes, we pay federal taxes. And I'm not for sure that we're getting our share of our tax dollars back into the city and in particular into District 1. Can you tell me why we're not
Yeah.
utilizing those?
I can answer all of that. So first to that, we're not. Two, so Todd T. Hart was a really good representative. He believed in something called earmarks, and that money that Mr. Alberta got was an earmark. Congressman Estes, who represents us now in the 4th District, does not. Actually, Republicans in the House don't agree with earmarks at all. They've actually changed the name to congressionally directed spending, and Congressman Estes is not interested in that because he doesn't believe in it. We did talk to him about that. On the Senate side, Senator Moran is supportive, but they actually look at bigger spending items than what we would have needed for that grocery store. And he's actually still at the table as we've been talking about the food desert. We've been trying to come up with a full city plan to address everything. His position as chair on the Appropriations Committee in the U.S. Senate, as well as his just influence that he has, he's been willing to help. We talk about it every time I see him. The goal right now is just to get that citywide plan to him. And his team had talked about anywhere upwards of $15 million. So we're trying to put that together now. The challenge with the Save-A-Lot, though, is that after Mr. Alberta, so the agreement with the federal dollars there, that building and the land was sold, but it was not owned by Save-A-Lot. So there was a owner in Florida that owned that, and Save-A-Lot was leasing from that person. So when we look at trying to save the building, we tried. We called the owner of the property, wouldn't even return the call from the city. So this gentleman that you spoke to really wasn't telling you the truth in that case. We wanted it to be a grocery store, and we had a few people who have cultural stores around here in Latino community that wanted to make that a grocery store. But the property owner that that property is on never responded. Not from us, not from realtor friends that I'd reached out to, and some who reached out to me saying that they had called. They were not interested in talking to us. They didn't care that the city manager was calling. They didn't care that the council member was calling. They would not return our phone calls. And then we find out later that they had made this deal for a medical facility. I think if Save-A-Lot would have owned it, it'd still be a grocery store because that's what we were working to, and we were trying to find some resources to help out. But unfortunately, they didn't own it, so we couldn't do anything about that. And once we got the funds back, for folks who don't know this, it was about $660,000 altogether of HUD money that went into that. When that property was sold at the end of the life of the original agreement, that money actually went towards the project, the Dunbar Theater, that my predecessor kind of helped direct that funding there. Once that property was sold, we had no control over it, no say so, and we really couldn't do anything about it at that point. But we did try. They just unfortunately didn't answer the call. But a lot of the federal funding, it's just our elected delegation doesn't always agree with congressionally directed spending, which is what could really help us. We've talked about that in a number of other areas to include affordable housing as well. As you know, Mr. Albertha was able to invest more than $20 million into the community and the houses that Power CDC bought. And luckily, Mennonite Housing and Habitat for Humanity and a few others are continuing that. Habitat just opened their 100th house in the Rock the Block area. So there's some really good investment coming there, but of course, we need more.
Okay, I want to touch on two things because I want to tell you you just given me some information that even I was not aware of. I was on the Metropolitan Area Planning Commission for, I think, 7 years. During that period of time was when Mr. Albertha was putting together and formulating the plans for that Save-A-Lot. Now, at that time, I don't know what's transpired since then, but at that time, Mr. Albertha owned that property. Save-A-Lot was leasing from, I guess he had it under CDC. I'm not sure, but Mr. Albertha owned that property. So I guess from what you're telling me, the property changed hands somewhere along the way, and I was not aware of that.
Yep. Somebody in Florida purchased it at some point. When this came to me, it was already in their hands. So I don't know when the purchase happened.
Okay. Now, you were on good terms with our governor. Okay.
Mhm.
The governor has, for the last couple of years now, had a surplus budget of $2.6 million and better. Why is it that we're not utilizing uh, that that stream of revenue from the Department of Commerce? Okay, or if not that, a grant for from the governor to to subsidize, I guess I'll say, or supplement a grocery store.
Yeah, we've been in touch with, I don't have the list in front of me, a couple of different state agencies. The challenges with the surplus in the legislature is the governor doesn't control it. So she may support it, she may advocate to the legislature, but ultimately the House is the purse strings. And unless the House and Senate agree to funding something, it won't happen. Even with her, she always puts out a budget proposal. They pick it apart. They do some of it. They don't do all of it. They add their own things to it. We've seen that now, asking the governor for $1 million for another project. The governor could put it in her budget, but again, unless the Senate President Ty Masterson, House Speaker Dan Hawkins agree to that and they can get their colleagues on board, it wouldn't matter. Now, Department of Commerce has some funds. They fund one of the sources that we were looking at, that one of the Black women I was talking about, Ashley Faust, had reached out to. And again, they had a bunch of different stipulations that we were working through. Also, there's some state funding that goes into Network Kansas. Network Kansas has really been trying to help out in different ways. I think they have Kansas Healthy Food Initiative. I think it's what it is. That was the funding source. It has different restrictions on where you can actually invest based upon where other grocery or convenience stores are. So there's some state money going into those areas. Oftentimes, there's some few different hurdles. And then again, anyone going, not just folks of color, has to have a proper business plan and all their paperwork in order. And that's something that sometimes we struggle with. And that's why it's good to have organizations like the Create campaign, where you can go in there, they'll help you out, oftentimes free of charge. The Kansas Small Business Development Center, reaching out to people like Wayne Bell. But a lot of times the financial backing requires you to have a certain credit score or certain documents and things that you might need. And not all of us have that. So it's a little harder to get that. But that's a challenge. But in the legislature, if the House and Senate won't agree to it, most of the time it won't happen.
Okay. Now, I just want to say this to you. You know, I get weekly newsletters from the state, and I continually look on there, and I think I got the last one a couple of days ago. But I see all of these grants that are going to rural areas of the state. And yet, problems are in the urban areas. And I don't see on the part of this governor And I don't know if it's because of the, and I hate to use this word, but the, well, I won't even use that word, but uh, the lack of request, I'll use that word, from our Black Caucus members for economic money or money for economic development. Because I'm seeing all of this money and these are grants, so they just don't have to go through the legislature. All these grants. And we're not talking about $1 million or 5 million, but these grants are going from the governor to these rural areas. Why can't the governor do the same thing? Now, as a matter of fact, she just did here just a couple weeks ago in this, whatever, 16, I don't know if it's 16 or $26 million grant program for these child advocacy programs. Those were all grants. $5 million to Ms. Barnes. You know what I'm saying? I mean,
Yeah.
so I don't understand why we have food deserts, and not only in Wichita, but throughout the state. And it's not being addressed.
Yeah, a lot of that is often championed by the governor or lieutenant governor, as he's also the secretary of commerce. But again, it goes back to the legislature. So they'll put money into rural opportunities and rural needs and not necessarily the urban needs. A lot of what I've learned about Topeka, and I'm sure Senator Faust-Cadeau or Representative O'Hobson Akar can attest to that, is it is a Democrat versus Republican thing, but oftentimes it's a rural versus urban thing. And the rural legislators tend to have a little bit more influence, and they won't support funding or efforts unless the rural community gets it. So when you see the grants that come out of the Commerce Department, it's because of the legislature putting money towards those rural efforts. I found that out when we were looking at trying to do the Kansas Reinvestment Act. So when you talk about folks coming into this seat without an economic plan, I can't speak for them, but I have been looking at trying to get investment in our community for some time. And when I was in Topeka and we talked about initially funding that from the state general fund, a lot of what I heard from the rural representatives, both senators and representatives, was, well, we don't need this much over here. We may need more over there in Wichita, but Wichita gets everything, or Johnson County gets everything. So that's kind of the challenges when we look at, we have way more needs because we have a higher population base. We have a lot of challenges we face here. You also have legislators that feel like we get too much. And so they will argue for what they want out in rural Kansas. And of course, any governor would go, highlight these are great investments. But the challenge in the legislature really is that rural versus urban. And if we can't get them to see the urban needs and how that truly impacts the state, because we even take in, when you look at our regional hospitals, we'll take in folks from Western Kansas. During COVID, we had people coming from as far as Liberal and Dodge City to the urban city, but the legislators don't always view it that way. So that's kind of the challenges there and how they allocate that money and dedicate it. So you'll see a lot of those grant opportunities. One great example is rural broadband. I had been arguing for broadband access in 67214, 208, 219, the need for it, funding for it. And for a number of years, it was only available rural in the rural part of the state because they felt like urban areas could get it themselves. It wasn't until recently that they kind of opened that up. And we have a digital equity summit coming here, I think March 1st, where we'll be talking more about what that looks like in urban areas and hopefully getting some actual funding and support.
That strange you bring that up. I was in I served in the Kansas African American Affairs Commission from 2008 until 2015. That, what you just talked about, that subject, has been on the table since at least 2012. Okay. All right. And so it's just now, as you say, coming into fruition. I don't understand why. But here's one of the things I want to say is I feel that District 1, we talk about the rural areas versus the urban areas, whatever, but I don't know if you noticed this. I don't know how you could help. But during the election time, our Democratic governor spent an awful lot of time in Wichita courting the black vote. Okay? I mean, a lot of time. And we make a mistake, Councilman Johnson, And when I say we, I'm talking about all of us. I'm talking about all the organization. I'm talking about the ministerial league. I'm talking about the NAACP. I'm talking about all of them. We don't ask for a damn thing for our vote. Okay, and that's the time you ask and you get it. And if you don't get it then, you're not going to get it. And we like to grin and go to photo ops and do all that kind of crap, just like they did last week or maybe it was early this week at the legislative, whatever they call it, the Black Legislative, whatever. Okay, you seen all the photo ops. You seen them around the governor. She's signing a Black History Month proclamation. All that's fine and dandy, but that does not equal economic success for District 1 in Wichita or North Topeka. Okay, and then I get an email talking about what a great success that was because it had 200 people. That's how you define success? And we walk away with nothing, just like when we went in, because mostly we didn't ask for anything because we're just too happy skinning and grinning, taking photo ops with the governor. I mean, I don't want to get off on that tangent, but anyhow, so I want to ask you this, sir, because of time. Look, you have got 1 year left after this year, and I don't know. I mean, I've heard some words about who are thinking about replacing you, and I don't know if you have discussed this with anybody or not. But one of the things I would tell you is that whoever is even thinking about that job, I want them to have an economic agenda up front before they ever get elected. And if they don't, I'm going to advise everybody not to support anybody that is not going in with an economic agenda, because that's where we're losing. And I want to ask you this, from your standpoint, having been in the on the council for 6 years, what do you feel are the three main problem areas for District 1?
Issue-wise, or are you looking at location?
Issue-wise.
The first one to me is economic development. When you look at the creation of jobs and especially empowerment of our communities, I think that is a game changer. And we have to be willing to accept that may make things look different. So when you look at neighborhoods that don't necessarily want to see businesses come in or any types of expansion, that has to change. I'll use the area I am trying to focus on over the Dunbar area. You know, you've got that theater there. There are some residents who don't want to see any business development there, but I think you could put some mixed use facilities in there. I think you could have some arts facilities in there. I think you could create jobs and it would change that neighborhood on top of building more homes in the area. But sometimes folks don't want that type of change. So I think we have to get more supportive of our small businesses and find resources there. I think that helps out with a number of issues. Second to me is affordable housing, trying to support these organizations that are building, but we need to build more. And we need to find a way to get not only the starter house opportunities for our community, but also what is that next step? How do you get from that $120,000 house into a $250,000 house? And nowadays economy, that's not what it used to be. That's like your secondary house. That is your 3, 4 bedroom house for a family that's growing. So we need to build more of those. We have to renovate what we have in our community to keep that stock. As Black people, we have to stop selling our houses and our property to other folks, keep that within the family. But between the economic piece and the affordable housing piece, those are probably my top two. And then my last one, which is all encompassing, is just quality of life and what are we doing? That's where a lot of my focus can be visually seen with the investments in McAdams, some of the investments coming in Murdoch Park, some of the investments coming in Glendive Park, having those spaces there, making sure our roads are up to par, our concrete streets are not in neighborhoods, our asphalt ones are getting better. But those are kind of the three things that I think are the number one challenge areas. And I do agree with you. Anybody who wants to serve in this seat does have to have, even if they don't have a plan up front, they need to have an understanding of economic development and the hoops and hurdles that we are jumping through. You take the Propel program that I worked with Create Campaign on, Create Campaign designed it. We had a few more District 1 funds left from the sale of the Hyatt. We created that. Anybody who applies for Propel can get up to $20,000 for their business. We tried to make it as easy to access as possible, so it's not a traditional loan. It's fixed rate, paid back over 36 months at 3.9 or 2.9% interest, or 3% interest actually. And it's there, and it was designed for people of color and women. Of course, it's open to anyone. We can't discriminate, but that was the target. And I got pushback. Like, why are we doing that? We could spend that money somewhere else. And to me, if we can create jobs from that and start businesses, one, that money gets paid back and we can help somebody else. But two, as we continue to look at the gaps between our white counterparts and business wise, the revenues, the abilities, their access, it's different. And until we can really erase that gap, or at least, try to make it smaller, it's going to be really hard for us. So anyone coming into the seat needs to have at least that basic understanding. I would hope they would have a plan. Much like you, I'll be also talking about that this year or next year. We can't turn our backs on businesses because, again, all the incentives that we have as a city that I've been trying to make more accessible for smaller businesses, if we are not able to take advantage of that, we are not going to progress, and we need to do more than what we have been.
Okay, let me just say this. I agree with you on number one, economic development, and number two, affordable housing. And that brings me to the project that you guys voted on yesterday to delay. But we're seeing on a semi-regular basis now an awful lot of money being spent for luxury apartments in the downtown area.
Mhm,
Okay, yesterday $90 million.
mhm.
You got your the the lofts and all that down in the downtown area on the West Bank and the East Bank. Now, but we're seeing hardly any money being spent for affordable housing. Now, you talk uh, about starter housing, whatever. So I want to bring up another issue with you. From my standpoint, I see us doing something that I feel is not in the best interest of people in low to moderate income areas, and that is the demolishing of some abandoned houses and homes. And the reason I say some, because some of these can be, uh, can be, there are people out there that are willing to purchase some of these homes, okay, and go in and make these livable, affordable for first time home buyers. But yet the city seems hell bent on just going in with the bulldozer and knocking everything down. But you see, development is when things are going up. When it's going down, sir, that's demolition, okay? And
Yeah.
that's what we see in our area is the demolition, but no development.
Yeah.
What's wrong with that problem?
So you brought up two things, and there's two important pieces of that. So the private development piece, the $90 million luxury apartments, the thing I've always told people is that's not our money. These are folks who want to build what they want to build. And when they see it come before the city, it's usually an IRB, industrial revenue bond, which allows us to either give a property tax break or a sales tax break on the materials they use to build it. And that's it. So when you see 90 million, that person, that applicant vantage point is the one they're spending $90 million to build that. The other challenge with this is, and I hope folks who do watch this look this up. Back in 2016, Senate Bill 366 was created in the legislature, which actually, our interpretation, and I'm working on this to see if it is accurate, will stop any municipality within the state of Kansas of tying incentive for affordable housing. So rent control is what they call it, controlling the price, to anything that municipality wants to do, whether it's zoning, whether it's approving some form of incentive. I do question part of the incentive piece, but it is very explicit to say we can't do something to limit the rent on a space, which means we can't force affordable housing with one of our IRBs or CIDs or one of those things. So I am trying to get legal interpretation on if that's accurate or if there's any gray area. But the state continues to preempt municipalities' ability to address these things. We see it with landlords, with rental registries. The state will try to come in and stop us from being progressive and dealing with that. For the home demolishment, the challenge there, there's a few activists that I've talked to about some of those challenges is we don't own those houses. Those are privately owned, and the council member tends to kind of make that final decision. So I'll take a few of the ones I've dealt with. There was one that came where someone said this house was a decent house and we should keep it. Everyone who would represent that house had died. We can't eminent domain that house. It'd have to go to a tax sale. I watched a house go to a tax sale in that same situation. Someone bought it, never did anything with it. The house continued to deteriorate. And unless that person was willing to sell, there was nothing we could do except say, hey, you need to repair it or to get demolished. The thing that most people in the community don't see is that the neighborhood presidents and active neighbors will reach out to the elected and say, you need to do something about this. If you can't get it boarded up and keep it boarded up because people will take off those boards and try to live in it, then they want it torn down. We've seen a few houses where someone who was unhoused got in there and squatted and started a fire to keep warm, and the house burned down on them, or they died in there. And so we have to strike a balance between the safety piece and getting it developed. But I've been very vocal about anyone who owns one of these homes, rather than demolish it, I'd rather see them sell it to somebody, one of us who will actually fix it up and get someone in there. But if they won't sell it, we can't make them sell it. And if it gets too bad, then we either have to continue to let that be a neighborhood issue or take them down. I'm always encouraging folks to, sell it to somebody who'll actually do something with it. And I've had people who want to, but the process that comes before the council, just so people know if they don't understand what's being said at the bench, is our team from MABCD, Metro Area Building Department, MABD, they will actually go in and have our inspectors look at it. They'll talk to whoever owns the property or send some form of notification. If that person responds, they go into what's called condemnation, where they're notified that, hey, unless you start making some improvements, we'll tear the house down. That initial part is just to try to get some compliance, because our goal isn't to tear it down, it's to get the house fixed up. If they stay in communication, if they work towards fixing it up and fixing the issues that they have, we'll pull them out of that. They keep the house, it's all good. If they don't respond, or they don't comply, or they don't get the proper permits to make sure the work is done correctly, and which now in a lot of our community is actually free to get those permits. That was a council initiative that we have. If they don't comply with that, then what happened is it start going towards coming to the council for a vote. The most of the time when somebody represents that space, at least for me, when they show up, I start to ask questions of, can you pay your specials? Can you pay your taxes? Do you actually have a plan to make this a habitable space in the next 6 months to a year? If they do, I always will give them an extra chance. If they don't, though, then I'm stuck with, do I leave this to be a neighborhood issue and hope that they'll do something, or do we demolish it? Usually I'll give you 3 to 6 months. Well, I'll give you 90 to 120 days and then have it come back to council, or I'll get a report about it to see if you're making progress. But if not, that's kind of where we're stuck. The biggest challenge that I tell everyone is we don't own it. If we had a chance to take the property on the council vote and then put it back out there, you see a lot more houses saved, because I know we could get that. We've had people reaching out saying they want to purchase it. They could purchase from us. I did also have a unique situation where there was a house that was salvageable, but there were 6 heirs. 4 of them were friendly, 2 of them were not. Somehow the 2 had a little more power than the 4, and they didn't want the other 2 to find out about that property because they have more properties here in Wichita. And they just said, hey, if you just tear it down, that's okay. I asked them if they were sure. They said yes. Somebody shows up trying to save that house and ended up connecting the family to the heirs, and the heirs came back and took all the other properties, and we still tore down the house. So it's always something there. That's why I always encourage people, get your affairs in order, get you a living will, make sure all of that's there. Because if not, and we have if we have to guess, more often than not, if it's in bad shape, it's getting torn down.
Okay, so we dealt with number 1 and number 2, and I'm gonna tell you where I differ with you just a little bit on number 3. Number 3 on my list is, and it's basically 2, but I'm gonna do a slash, jobs/crime, because crime is rampant in this city. And I don't see where we're making any big inroads in reducing crime in this city. Now, I kept you longer than I intended to, but let me just ask you, I do have to ask you two questions. Number one, why is it that we're taking so long to bring to justice the two individuals that we saw on the video in the theft of the Jackie Robinson statue? We got the truck owner, the truck driver, I assume, but those two individuals that we clearly saw in that video are not those of a 45-year-old man. Okay, so if we've got the main, if we've got the, here's what I don't understand. If we've got the owner of the truck, and he is clearly telling you that his truck was not stolen, and he didn't lend it to anybody, there's no way in the hell, excuse my expression, that he doesn't know who his accomplices were. Those two individuals should be arrested today.
Yeah. What I can say about the case is that WPD and the DA are working to build a rock solid case against the other individuals, and it's probably more than two that are involved. They don't want to hastily make an arrest and not have all of their I's dotted and T's crossed. Just like this individual, it was kind of known for a while who this person was, but they were just making sure that they had the right type of case so that when they do arrest him, it would pretty much go through. And they're doing the same thing right now, and also following a few other leads on anyone else. I just encourage people to pay attention to what the DA said at the last press conference, and that was that anyone directly involved or indirectly involved will probably face charges here at some point. They have a lot more information than what's publicly being said. They're just making sure that everything is rock solid. So when they do go to the DA, it's a rock solid case.
Okay, my final question for you, sir, is what's the update on the latest shooting there where the young 3-year-old was killed?
The last update I saw was police were doing some interviews on that, trying to figure out what was the motive behind that. And honestly, we've just seen way too much violence, violent crime going on. And the one thing I keep saying, it sounds like a simple solution to some, but if we all don't kind of pull together and do more about that, we're going to keep seeing it. And what I've just said to people is, you know, these young people and even some of the adults who are doing it, but focusing on the young people, they're getting weapons from somewhere. So we got to find out where that is. And then two, they're keeping them somewhere. And I am an annoying parent. I encourage everybody to be an annoying parent, guardian, grandparent, asking our young people where they're going, who they'll be with, looking through their personal belongings. My daughter hates when I take her phone and look through it, but I need to know who you're texting, what your group chats are, what apps you're using, who you're hanging out with, what type of person are they. You know, I need to know all of that. And I think if we did that, it makes it harder for young folks who do have guns or knives or any other weapon to keep those, one, at home. And then two, if we are as a community more nosy about that, you begin to kind of root out some of the ones who are doing things they shouldn't. It makes it a little easier to find them. But then also as a community, we have to offer more opportunities for our young folks. Churches with gyms and big spaces, open them up to our young people. The city, that's why we had we had our summer evening rec program. You know, we have to open up our spaces. We have to make sure those are secure, but it's going to take all of us in this violent crime. Some of the young folks who are doing the shooting, not thinking about who else can be impacted. You know, we all have to agree to kind of clamp down on that the best we can. And, you know, we're getting more officers, but I've always felt, you know, more of that solution is on community than police. We can't arrest our way out of it. And a lot of folks are thinking about making a mistake that can cost them a lifetime. If we can stop them from making a mistake, they'll never see law enforcement. So really, it's going to be on more of it on us.
Okay, now I said that was my last question, but I can't let you go without asking this question. You got 1 year left on the council. What plans do you have for the future? Once your term is over, what is your political ambitions or what is your future? Where will we see Brandon Johnson resurface at?
Well, by February 1st of 2026, Brandon Johnson will need a job. So I'll be out, you know, looking for work. um, I haven't given a whole lot of thought to a political future. Honestly, and most people don't believe me on this, but I really just want to try to do a good job my last 2 years. If I do a good job, that kind of leaves options open if politics is where we want to continue. But the biggest thing is I just want to go where I can be helpful. If I can be helpful in another office and connect people and bring resources to community, I will. If my style of leadership is not the style, I'll be looking for a job that, again, I can continue to take care of my family. But my goal really is to finish up strong, do what I can to address the issues we talked about, and then try to help the next person get started and encourage them as they go forward.
Brandon Johnson, council member for District 1. Mr. Johnson, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. And I know you're a busy man. We've been working for quite a while to try to get this in place. So
Yeah.
I really thank you, sir, and come back anytime.
Will do. Yeah, I'd be happy to come back and talk about some of the things you asked that I didn't have some answers for, and I'll read that report so we can talk about that too.
Okay, you're welcome anytime, sir. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye.